They say that in the nonprofit world, you do it for the mission, not the money. But no one ever warns you that sometimes the people leading the mission are the ones dragging it down. My name is Lena Torres. I am 36 years old, born and raised in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and for the past 7 years, I gave everything I had, my time, my energy, even my own money, to a nonprofit called Harmony Works. We specialized in music therapy for trauma survivors, veterans, foster youth, survivors of domestic violence. We gave them something to hold on to through melody and rhythm when words were not enough. It was more than a job. It was a calling. At least, that is what I kept telling myself while I quietly held the place together behind the scenes. When I first joined Harmony Works, I was young, idealistic, and genuinely hopeful. I was hired as an event coordinator, but within 6 months, I was doing 3 different jobs without the titles or the pay. I planned our fundraisers down to the minute, built relationships with every single donor we had, and kept the lights on during lean months by covering costs from my personal savings. No one asked me to do that. I just believed in the mission that much. Meanwhile, Grant Halley, our executive director, was more interested in posturing than progress. He called himself a visionary leader in every meeting, but when it came to doing the actual work, he was nowhere to be found. Except, of course, when there was a photo op or a chance to take credit for something I had pulled off. Grant was in his 40s, polished in that empty, slick way you only see at networking mixers and failed tech startups. His job was to run the organization, but he preferred to talk. Long speeches at board meetings, vague strategy presentations, and LinkedIn posts filled with words like disruption and innovation. All smoke, no fire. He constantly repackaged my ideas as his own, and I let it happen for far too long. Why? Because I thought maybe, just maybe, the mission was more important than my pride. I thought if I pushed through, it would eventually be worth it. That someday, someone would notice. They never did, not at first. What people saw was a clean-cut man in a tailored suit talking about impact metrics. What they missed was me, hunched over spreadsheets at midnight, calling venues in panic, cold emailing donors, chasing down invoices. I once stitched together an entire gala when our caterer dropped out the day before, called in favors, sourced food trucks, and even got a jazz trio to perform for free. Grant's name went on the press release. Mine was not even mentioned in the event recap. He called it a team effort while smirking in my direction. I was the team. The resentment built slowly like a slow drip through a cracked pipe. At first, I ignored it. Then I tried to talk to him, asked for more responsibility, a title change, anything. He said, "Let me think about it." He never brought it up again. Eventually, he stopped responding to my emails altogether unless I was organizing something that benefited him directly. He had a habit of dropping tasks on me with zero notice and acting like it was a privilege for me to be included. "Lena, I trust you to handle this," he would say, right before disappearing for 3 days. Meanwhile, I was left smoothing over board members' concerns, fixing grant applications he forgot to review, and rescheduling donor calls he canceled last minute. What stung the most was not the lack of recognition. It was how easily he dismissed everything I built. I was the one who revived our monthly donor program. I negotiated our partnership with the city's community health department. I developed a music curriculum that was later implemented across 3 states, but every win became Grant's strategic leadership. I watched him stand in front of our board, speaking my words, pitching my ideas, and nodding like he had thought of them in the shower that morning. I smiled through it all, but inside, I was boiling. I remember one winter when our federal funding was delayed, and the board was panicking. We were on the verge of canceling our holiday therapy workshops. I quietly used my own credit card to pay the musicians and rent the space. I never asked for a refund. No one even knew. That program went on to help over 50 families that season. Grant told the board it was a miracle turnaround. I was too tired to correct him, but that was the moment I started to keep records. Quietly, meticulously. Not because I wanted revenge, at least not yet, but because something told me this was going to come back around. And when it did, I wanted the truth to be louder than his lies. So, I stayed. For the music, for the clients, for the mission. But not for him. Never for him. I told myself it was temporary, that when the timing was right, I would leave on my own terms. What I did not expect was that the betrayal would come at the one event I had poured my heart into, and that in the most public way possible. He would try to erase me for good. 3 weeks before the biggest event of my career, I sat in my living room with a glass of red wine in one hand and my resignation letter open on the screen in front of me. It was finished, typed, formatted, polite, and professional. No emotion, no drama, just a simple explanation that after 7 years, I could no longer continue working under leadership that ignored, undermined, and used me. I read it 3 times. My finger hovered over the mouse. 1 click, and it would be over. But something stopped me. Maybe it was exhaustion, maybe it was stubbornness, or maybe it was the fact that I had spent the last 6 months building this gala from the ground up, and if I walked away now, the entire event could fall apart. The gala was not just any event. It was a full-scale production hosted at the Pacific Arts Pavilion in Los Angeles, with nearly 400 guests expected. Our biggest corporate sponsor, Halvern Freight, was backing the event and had pledged a 6-figure donation if everything went smoothly. That money would fund an entire year of therapy programs, community workshops, and staff salaries. I had personally secured every major donor in attendance. I had built the run of show, booked the performers, overseen the catering, designed the invitations, and trained the volunteers. Every detail, down to the flower arrangements, had my name on it. If I left now, it would not just be Grant who paid the price. It would be the clients, the families, the people I actually cared about. I stared at that letter for over an hour. Part of me wanted to hit send just to feel the relief of being free. But the other part, the one that always stayed longer than it should, kept thinking about the kids who would lose their therapy sessions if this gala went south. I thought about the veterans who had told me that music saved their lives. I thought about the musicians who had donated their time because they believed in the cause. If I left now, what message would that send? That I gave up when it mattered most? That I could not handle the pressure? No, that was not how I wanted my story to end. So I saved the draft. I did not delete it. I kept it right there in my desktop folder, staring back at me like a quiet reminder. I would open it from time to time just to read it. Just to remember that I had a choice, even if I was not using it yet. Then I would close it, take a deep breath, and get back to work. Because the mission still mattered, and because, in some small, petty way, I wanted to prove I could pull off the most successful event in our organization's history, despite the man who did everything in his power to hold me back. Grant, of course, was useless during this entire planning process. He showed up late to meetings, skimmed budgets without reading them, and made last-minute changes that always created more work for me. At one point, he insisted on adding a surprise speech to the program without telling me, forcing me to reorganize the timeline, notify the AV team, and push back the musical performance. When I pushed back, he said, "Lena, just trust the process. I know what I am doing." But he never did. I knew it. The staff knew it. And honestly, the donors were starting to see it too. What made it worse was that every time he talked about the gala to the board or on social media, he made it sound like he was the one running the show. He called it a labor of love and praised our incredible leadership team, conveniently avoiding any mention of me. It was like watching someone else take credit for a book you wrote by hand. But I swallowed the resentment, smiled when I needed to, nodded politely in meetings. Because if the gala failed, Grant would blame me. But if it succeeded, I wanted the record to show that I was the one who pulled it off, again. I worked 14-hour days leading up to the event. Some nights I slept at the office. I skipped dinners, canceled plans, and ignored my own birthday. But the pieces started to come together. The venue looked stunning. The performance lineup was solid. Halvern's executive team confirmed their attendance, including Aubrey King herself. She was a force, sharp, direct, and impossible to impress. If anyone could change my future, it was her. So I made sure every detail was perfect. Not for Grant, not even for HarmonyWorks, but for the people I could help and maybe, just maybe, for myself. I did not know it then, but that unsent letter would come to mean more than I imagined. It was not just a resignation. It was a promise that one day I would leave, but not quietly and not as a victim. I would walk away on my own terms with something to show for it. The day before the gala, the Pacific Arts Pavilion buzzed with last-minute setups, tables being draped in deep plum linens, spotlights tested across the stage, the catering team finalizing the wine pairings. I was exhausted but running on instinct, checking every detail like my reputation depended on it, because it did. The final walkthrough was scheduled for that afternoon. I had sent out the timeline, double-checked the vendor deliveries, and printed the seating charts myself that morning. I wore my best blazer not for Grant, but because I needed to look like the woman who ran the show, even if most people still believed it was him. When the executive team from Halvern Freight arrived, I switched into my calm and collected mode. Aubrey King, their chief operating officer, walked in like she owned the room. Sleek suit, sharp heels, expression unreadable. She was in her early 50s, all business, and the kind of woman who did not have time for nonsense. I had spoken to her only twice before, both times on donor calls Grant nearly missed. She had never said much, but I could tell she was watching everything. We moved through the venue in a tight group. Aubrey, her team, Grant pretending to lead, and me quietly managing the real logistics. At one point, Grant started explaining the stage layout as if he had chosen it. He pointed to the podium and said, "We thought it would be more impactful to center it, to really anchor the room." I was standing 3 feet away. I had mapped that stage design weeks ago. Aubrey glanced at me, then raised one eyebrow like she knew exactly what was going on. Halfway through the tour, she fell back to walk beside me. "Lena, right?" she said, just loud enough that only I could hear. I nodded, trying to keep it professional. She gestured toward the dining setup and said, "Let me guess. You picked the centerpieces too?" I laughed softly. "Guilty." She nodded again, approving. Then her voice dropped just a bit. "You know, you are the only reason we are still writing 6-figure checks to this place." My heart skipped. I kept my face neutral, but her words sank in deep. She looked around to make sure no one was listening, then added, "You ever thought about consulting?" Her tone was light, almost joking. Almost, but her eyes stayed locked on mine, serious. I opened my mouth, then closed it again. I smiled, polite but non-committal. "I have thought about a lot of things," I said. She gave a small nod, then walked ahead like nothing happened. But the question lingered. My mind was suddenly racing, and I was not thinking about centerpieces anymore. For the rest of the walkthrough, I went through the motions, but inside, something had shifted. Could this be the way out I had been waiting for? I had spent years keeping Harmony Works alive with duct tape, charm, and sleepless nights. I knew how to run galas, build donor pipelines, create programs from scratch. I had fixed more crises than I could count, and done it all without a proper title or fair pay. Maybe, just maybe, I had been so focused on surviving that I forgot I had the skills to thrive somewhere else. Maybe I did not have to wait around hoping someone would hand me a promotion that was never coming. That night, I reopened my resignation letter. I reread it slowly like I was seeing it for the first time. It still hurt, but it also felt like a draft of a life I was finally ready to write. I started jotting down notes, what services I could offer, which clients I might pursue, even ideas for a brand name. Raise Collective. The phrase just came to me, and I typed it out in a blank document. I sat there in the quiet, just breathing, letting the possibility of a new future take shape. Of course, I still had a job to do. The gala was tomorrow, and if anything went wrong, I knew Grant would throw me under the bus before the first dessert course hit the table. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had leverage, like someone saw my worth beyond the nonprofit walls I had built and protected for years. Aubrey King's offhand question had cracked something open. She did not make promises. She did not offer me a job, but she saw me, and that changed everything. So I tucked that moment away like a secret in my back pocket. I was not sure when or how I would use it, but I knew this. If the ground ever gave way under me, I would not fall. I would build a new platform from the ruins. And maybe, just maybe, I would make sure the ones who doubted me watched as I did. The night of the gala, I arrived early, dressed in deep navy silk with my hair pinned the way my mother used to do it for piano recitals. I carried my clipboard, my notes, and a calm I had forced myself to wear like armor. The Pacific Arts Pavilion was glowing, every table set with candles and fresh orchids, every detail in place. It felt like standing in a painting I had spent months creating. I greeted donors, made small talk with performers, triple-checked with the sound team. People smiled, complimented the setup, told me it was the most elegant event HarmonyWorks had ever pulled off. I smiled back, even as my stomach churned. It was not nerves, it was instinct. Something felt off. Grant had barely shown up. He breezed in late, gave a few forced handshakes, and disappeared into the green room for most of the evening. That suited me fine. I did not need him around to ruin the momentum. I had made sure everything was handled. From the dinner service to the silent auction, it all flowed like clockwork. By the time dessert was served, the room was glowing with warm laughter and clinking glasses. I had my speech tucked in my hand, ready to go. It was short, hopeful, about resilience and rebuilding through music. It was not about me. It never was. Right before I walked on stage, I felt my phone buzz in my clutch. I thought it might be a timing update or a message from the AV team. Instead, it was from Grant. Just 7 words. "You're done after tonight, don't make a scene." At first, I thought it was a mistake, a typo, a sick joke, but the longer I stared at the screen, the colder my spine became. Fired, by text. In the middle of the gala I had planned, my mouth went dry. I looked over at Grant, standing near the back of the room with a drink in hand, chatting like it was just another fundraiser. That coward did not even have the decency to say it to my face. The announcer cued my name. Applause followed. I walked onto the stage with my heels clicking against the wood, the weight of the moment pressing on my shoulders. I held the microphone, took one long breath, and steadied my voice. "Good evening. I had planned to talk about growth tonight, about the impact of your donations, about the joy we have seen in our clients this past year." I paused and looked toward the back, directly at Grant. But it turns out I was just fired via text message by our executive director, so I guess this will be my last event with HarmonyWorks. The room fell into complete silence. Forks stopped midair. Glasses froze in hands. For a split second, no one moved. Then whispers spread like a spark across dry grass. Grant's face turned pale. I saw one of the Halvern executives lean forward, clearly confused. Someone gasped. One board member dropped her phone onto her plate. I handed the microphone back to the host and walked off stage without another word. I did not cry. I did not break. I simply walked, heels steady, shoulders back. When I reached the green room, I locked the door behind me and sat down, breathing hard but calm. The text was still glowing on my screen. 7 words. 7 cheap words meant to erase 7 years of work. I stared at it one last time, then took a screenshot. Outside the door, I could hear the chaos unfolding. Donors were asking questions. Halvern's team had pulled Grant aside. One of the volunteers knocked gently and said, "They're asking for you out there." I did not respond. I needed a moment. The shock had not worn off, but something sharper was rising beneath it, clarity. I had nothing left to lose. Grant thought he could erase me in silence with no witnesses, but he picked the wrong night. He picked the wrong woman. I had planned every inch of this event, and now everyone knew it. And more importantly, they knew how I had been treated. My silence would have protected him, but he forced my hand, and the truth hit harder than I ever could have imagined. As I sat in that room, I thought of Aubrey King. I thought of the consulting offer she had hinted at. I thought of the name I had typed in secret, Ray's Collective. Suddenly, everything I had been too scared to believe felt within reach. This betrayal was ugly, it was cruel, but it might have been the push I needed to finally walk away and build something that belonged to me. I would not just recover, I would rise, and I would make sure everyone who ever underestimated me remembered exactly who made HarmonyWorks worth saving. The moment I stepped off that stage, everything changed. I did not cry and I did not scream. I just sat alone in the green room, waiting for the sound of the world crumbling, and it came quickly. I could hear the low hum of confusion at first, chairs shifting, voices whispering, people murmuring in disbelief. But then came the sharper sounds, a man demanding answers, a woman exclaiming, "Is this how they treat people who run the show?" Then silence again, heavy and unnatural for a room full of donors, board members, and corporate sponsors. It was like someone had cut the power and no one knew where to look. I found out later that Aubrey King stood up within seconds of my announcement. No hesitation. She looked Grant in the face, turned to her team, and said, "We are leaving," then walked out without touching her dessert. Her exit was the first domino. 2 other Halvern Freight execs followed her without a word. That alone would have made a statement, but then came the others. One by one, sponsors stood. Someone from the Bravena Foundation, I think his name was Carl, stood up near the back and said it loud enough for the whole room to hear, "This is disgraceful." Then he too left along with his entire table. These were not people who made dramatic scenes. These were high net worth professionals. The fact that they walked out told everyone else what really mattered. The rest of the night played out like a ghost performance. The band kept playing, but no one danced. The volunteers tried to keep the dinner on track, but hardly anyone touched their food. The wine kept flowing, but it was not celebration. It was confusion, gossip, awkward glances across the room. People were not talking about the auction or the mission of HarmonyWorks anymore. They were talking about me, about the firing, about Grant, and about how someone so clearly responsible for the entire success of the night had just been discarded like she was nothing. The board members looked shell-shocked. Some tried to laugh it off. Some avoided eye contact entirely, and a few, to their credit, looked genuinely concerned. But no one tried to bring me back out or offer an explanation. Grant, meanwhile, tried to salvage what he could. He gave a stiff, impersonal closing speech that no one really listened to. He said something vague about leadership transitions and looking to the future. But even from backstage, I could tell his words were falling flat. He had lost the room, and he knew it. By morning, the damage was already spreading. My phone started lighting up, not with apologies from Grant or the board, of course, but from people I had worked with over the years. Donors, volunteers, a journalist I had met at a music therapy conference 3 months earlier. People wanted to know what happened. People wanted the real story. The truth was moving faster than any official statement could catch. Within 24 hours, 6 major donors had paused their pledges. 3 of them emailed directly to the board, saying they needed clarity on what happened at the gala before moving forward. Halvern Freight's funding cycle was frozen until further notice, and I was told the Bravena Foundation requested a full internal review of HarmonyWorks' leadership. What that meant, in plain terms, was that Grant had lit the match, and now the entire organization was standing in gasoline. It would have been easy for me to feel vindicated, but in that moment, I felt more stunned than anything else. Not because I did not believe they deserved it, but because I had spent so long thinking no one noticed, that all the work, the effort, the long nights and early mornings would vanish the moment I walked away. And here it was, proof that I mattered, that the work mattered, and that people saw it, even if they never said it out loud. The gala was supposed to be a celebration. Instead, it became a warning. A warning that when you build something on the back of someone else's labor and try to erase them, it does not end quietly. It ends in front of 200 witnesses, with plates untouched and a ballroom full of angry donors. HarmonyWorks had not collapsed yet, but the cracks were loud, and the silence that followed said everything. Grant thought he could out-talk the truth. Within 48 hours of the gala fallout, he was already in damage control mode. He started calling board members individually, trying to reframe what happened as a misunderstanding and claiming I had become emotionally unstable under stress. According to him, I had threatened to sabotage the event and had to be removed quietly for the safety of the organization. It was laughable, but when someone in a leadership role repeats lies with just enough polish, some people start to believe them, or at least start to question what they saw. The problem for Grant was that the room had seen too much, and worse for him, the people who had known me for years were not buying a word of it. Within a day, rumors started bouncing between departments. My former assistant, Nora Matthews, who had stayed on after I left, reached out to me in private. Nora was 27, sharp as a blade, loyal to a fault, and far more observant than Grant had ever given her credit for. She said, "I know what he's doing, and I have proof he planned this weeks ago." What she sent me was gold, a forwarded internal email from Grant to one of the board liaisons. The subject line was, "Succession Plan." The body of the message outlined how he intended to ease out Ms. Carrington after the gala and bring in fresh energy, namely his niece, Mallory Halley. I nearly dropped my phone when I read it. Mallory was 23, had a degree in social media marketing, and had worked exactly 1 summer at a fashion brand before quitting because the hours were too intense. She had no nonprofit experience, no background in therapy, and no understanding of the delicate work HarmonyWorks actually did. But she was family, and apparently that mattered more to Grant than everything I had built over 7 years. Nora had also heard Grant on speakerphone in his office the week before the gala, telling Mallory not to worry about qualifications. "You'll have people under you who know the boring parts," he had said. "Just be visible, smile, and keep the board happy." If I had not been so furious, I might have laughed, but all I felt was that deep, sour burn of betrayal. I was never going to get credit. I was never meant to be anything more than a placeholder until he could slide his niece into the seat I had earned. Once the email leaked, and yes, Nora made sure it leaked, the temperature shifted fast. One of the board members forwarded it to Halvern Freight. Another demanded an emergency session. Several longtime donors emailed me directly, saying they were sorry, that they had trusted the wrong person. The sympathy was nice, but I had no interest in being pitied. I wanted the truth out there. And now it was. Grant, meanwhile, panicked. He tried to say the email was taken out of context and not an official plan. He claimed Mallory had been volunteering and had simply expressed interest in a possible role, but no one was buying it. The board was now fully aware that he had fired the person responsible for their biggest fundraiser mid-event and tried to install a completely unqualified family member in her place. That was not just unethical. That was reckless. To make things worse, someone on the tech team, probably Nora again, leaked a recording of Grant in the staff break room, ranting about how these donors are too emotional and Natalie was never going to be more than middle tier. He laughed as he said it. That audio made it all the way to the Brevenna Foundation and to 2 smaller music therapy partners who were considering partnerships. By the end of the week, all of them had frozen talks and demanded structural review. Grant had tried to make me look unhinged. Instead, he made himself look incompetent, arrogant, and completely out of touch. Every move he made only tightened the noose. The same charm that had once blinded the board now sounded like spin, and the more he talked, the more people started asking how much of HarmonyWorks' success had really come from him. The answer was becoming obvious. He had built nothing. He had only occupied a chair. I had built the programs, nurtured the donors, trained the staff, and kept the entire machine running. And now, for the first time, everyone was finally seeing it for what it was. Grant's illusion of leadership was cracking wide open, and I had not even lifted a finger. The truth had done all the work. They thought I had walked away empty-handed. What they did not know was that I had been keeping quiet for a reason. I had seen how Grant operated from day one. He was charming when the cameras were on, and ruthless when they were not. He buried failures, inflated wins, and always made sure credit floated up to him. After the first time he erased my name from a successful grant proposal and presented it as his own, I started keeping receipts. Quietly, methodically, for 7 years. Every time he took one of my initiatives and pitched it as his vision, I saved the drafts, complete with metadata showing when I wrote them. When he rerouted funds from a community youth program to cover an executive retreat, I noted the discrepancy. When part-time staff were paid late because of budget constraints, but the board was told we were under budget, I screenshotted the ledger. I was not a saboteur. I was a realist. I knew men like Grant rarely failed upward without help. So I gave him all the rope he needed and documented every time he started to tighten it around his own neck. The digital folder lived in the cloud under a boring name. Workshop Notes Archive. Inside it were spreadsheets, time-stamped drafts, budget reports, email threads, and side-by-side comparisons of my work versus what he claimed in board reports. I even had screenshots of internal chats where he bragged to his inner circle about massaging the donor metrics before meetings. The cherry on top? A presentation I had created for a donor outreach expansion that Halvern Freight had praised in writing, only for Grant to slap his name on it during the last board retreat. I had the original deck, plus the one he doctored. The differences were impossible to miss. When Marisol Vega, our board chair, called me that Tuesday morning, I knew it was time. Marisol was 52, sharp, elegant, and famously hard to rattle. She was the kind of woman who could kill a bad proposal with a single eyebrow raise. She said, "Natalie, I would like to hear your side before the board takes any formal vote. Just facts, nothing emotional." I smiled, even though she could not see it. "Of course," I said, "I will drop something by." An hour later, I walked into her law office with a simple white envelope and a flash drive. Inside the envelope was a printed summary, clean, professional, and free of bitterness. Just a straightforward outline of the discrepancies I had seen, along with supporting files. I had included no opinion, no editorializing, just what I had witnessed and recorded. I wanted to make it easy for them to follow the trail themselves. I had nothing to prove anymore. The work spoke for itself. Marisol took the envelope and drive without a word. Her expression was unreadable, but I knew she would look at it, and I knew she would share it with the others. That afternoon, my phone buzzed with a text from a board member I barely knew. It just said, "Thank you." By evening, 3 more had reached out quietly, asking for clarification on specific projects I had led. That night, Grant canceled a scheduled interview he had lined up with a local news outlet. Maybe someone told him the storm had officially begun. I did not want revenge for the sake of revenge. That was never the goal. What I wanted, what I had earned, was recognition, accountability, and truth. If HarmonyWorks was ever going to survive what it had become under Grant, the board needed to know who had truly kept the lights on and who had siphoned the power for himself. The best part? I never had to raise my voice. I never had to stoop to his level. I simply let my years of invisible labor speak louder than any press release or pre-written apology ever could. Grant had spent 7 years polishing a persona. I had spent 7 years building a record, and in the end, mine held more weight. 2 days after the board chair took my flash drive, I got a message from Aubrey King. It was short and direct, just like her. "Lunch this week. Zane wants in too." I did not even need to ask what it was about. I knew. Halvern Freight was moving fast, and they were moving with intention. So I said yes and found myself sitting across from both of them at a quiet corner table in Pasadena, just far enough from the chaos of HarmonyWorks, but close enough to feel the ripple of what had just gone down. Aubrey King, 41, sharp and focused, barely touched her iced tea before getting right to it. "Natalie," she said, "we have been watching this unfold, and I want to be clear. What happened at the gala should have never happened. You were the reason we stayed involved as long as we did." She glanced at Zane Park, Halvern's director of social impact 38, who gave me a knowing nod. I had met him twice before, briefly, but now his attention was locked in. Aubrey leaned in and continued, "We have a proposal, and I hope you will hear us out." I listened carefully, trying to keep my breathing even, my expression calm, but my heart was racing. This was not just a sympathy lunch. They had something real in mind. Zane pulled out a sleek presentation folder and slid it across the table. I opened it and saw my own vision staring back at me. A nationwide music outreach initiative, one that used therapy-based performance programs in schools, shelters, and prisons. The very pitch I had spent months developing at HarmonyWorks, the one Grant shelved because he thought it was too ambitious. I blinked. "This is mine," I said slowly, my eyes still scanning the details. "These are my program pillars, my community site tiers. This is the structure I proposed 2 years ago." Zane smiled. "We know. We dug through our notes. You pitched something like this during the advisory summit." Aubrey remembered it, and we found the slides. We know where it came from. That moment hit harder than I expected. Not because they had used my idea, but because they gave me credit. No spinning, no massaging, no vague talk about collaborative brainstorming. Just plain honesty. I looked up, and Aubrey was already opening her notebook. "We want you to lead it," she said. "Full autonomy. 6-month consulting contract to start. You will shape the rollout and choose the regional partners. If it works well, we scale. If you want to stay on beyond that, we talk about long-term strategy roles." I just sat there for a second, taking it all in. They were offering me more than a job. They were offering validation, ownership, trust, things I had begged for at HarmonyWorks, things that Grant withheld like power tools he never learned to use. This was different. "I want my name on everything," I said quietly. "No more hidden work. No more ghostwriting strategies for someone else to pitch." Zane nodded. "Of course, your name, your voice, you run this." There was a pause. Then Aubrey added, "We are not just hiring your skills. We are hiring your integrity. What you did at that gala, that took guts. It told us more about your leadership than any resume ever could." I felt something break loose in my chest. Maybe relief, maybe disbelief. For so long, I had been stuck in a cycle of silent effort and invisible labor. Suddenly, I was being seen, not just as a fixer, not as someone who could smooth chaos behind the scenes, but as a leader with her own voice and vision. I signed the contract that Friday, 6 months to build what I had once dreamed of in the back corner of a cluttered nonprofit office. Except now, I would not be begging for leftover grants or fighting to be heard in board meetings. Now, I would build on my terms, with support, with visibility, and with a partner who actually wanted me to succeed. As I walked out of Halvern's offices that afternoon, sunlight hit just right through the glass doors, and I smiled to myself. I was no longer the woman who got fired in the middle of her own event. I was the woman who turned that moment into something bigger, something better, and I was just getting started. They say karma moves slowly, but in this case, it moved like wildfire. Within a week of Halvern pulling their support, 3 more funders followed. The Bravina Foundation, the Hopewell Arts Fund, and even the little community credit union that always showed up with matching donations, all gone. In less than a month, HarmonyWorks lost 70% of its funding. You could feel the panic settle into the walls of that building like mold, and I was not even there to see it in person, but word traveled fast, especially through Nora. Nora Ramos, my former assistant, only 26 but sharp as broken glass, kept me updated without me ever needing to ask. She was still working inside, watching it crumble in real time. One afternoon, she texted me 2 words, "He's unraveling." That was followed by a screenshot. It was a group chat message Grant sent to the leadership team, ranting about toxic women trying to sabotage legacy work. It was so ridiculous I almost laughed, but mostly I just felt disgusted. There he was, still blaming everyone but himself, still using those old, tired excuses to try and cover for his failure. But the real nail in the coffin came later that week. Nora sent me another message. This time, it was an internal memo. It had been drafted the day after I left. A cold, sterile message from Grant to the board and the development team, instructing them to scrub my name from all active materials, grants, proposals, past donor reports. Every single thing I had touched, he wanted removed or reassigned under general team efforts. The wording was careful, bureaucratic, but the intent was clear. Erase me before the audit. Unfortunately for him, Nora was not the only person in the building who still had a backbone. Someone, still anonymous to this day, leaked that memo to every major donor, every foundation, every organization still tied to HarmonyWorks. And I do not know how it landed for everyone, but I know exactly how it hit the Bravina Foundation. Their director emailed me personally, forwarding the memo and writing just 3 words, "We believe you." It was surreal. For so long, I had done everything quietly. I cleaned up messes, covered for overspending, wrote up proposals that other people presented. And now, not only were people seeing the truth, they were acting on it. One by one, donors started to send messages back to HarmonyWorks. They asked questions. They asked for records. They asked why a woman who had built the entire funding strategy from the ground up was suddenly erased. And Grant? He had no good answers. Nora said he tried to spin it like I had abandoned the mission, that I was always planning to leave and had caused the fallout on purpose. But it did not work. People had already seen the clips from the gala. They had read the reports, and more than anything, they had seen the results of what I built and the chaos that followed when I left. 3 weeks after the memo leaked, a formal statement went out from the HarmonyWorks board. They announced that Grant Halley had chosen to retire early to pursue personal opportunities. That was their polite way of saying he had been forced out. No goodbye party, no glowing tribute, just a footnote at the bottom of a Thursday newsletter and a new interim director in place by Monday. I sat on my porch with a cup of coffee when Nora called to tell me. She just said, "He's gone." I looked out at the sunlight coming through the trees and smiled a little. Not because I hated him, not because I wanted revenge in some cruel, petty way, but because justice, real, quiet justice, had finally shown up. I never wanted to burn HarmonyWorks down. That place had done good once, but the truth is, it rotted under bad leadership. And the fire that took it down? It was lit the moment Grant decided ego mattered more than impact. All I did was stop protecting him from the flames, and honestly, I slept better for it. 1 year later, I found myself standing backstage in a grand ballroom in downtown Chicago, waiting for my name to be announced. The chandeliers sparkled like stars, the music played softly under the hum of conversation, and for a moment, I just breathed. Deep and calm. I was not a nervous employee this time, clutching cue cards someone else had edited. I was the keynote speaker, the founder, the strategist, the woman behind the mission. My company, Lumen Impact Strategies, had helped Halvern Freight launch their first national cultural outreach campaign, and tonight was the public celebration of that success. When the MC said my name, Natalie Reyes, founder of Lumen Impact, I stepped out in a navy silk dress, heels that did not ache, and a presence that felt earned, not borrowed. The applause started before I said a single word, and when I did speak, I kept it simple, honest, and real. I talked about why arts and culture matter, about how outreach should not be transactional. It should be transformational. I told stories of the kids we reached in pilot cities. I shared moments where a single drumbeat, a shared song, a dance workshop in a rural school gym opened up something powerful for people who had felt forgotten. I never once mentioned Harmony Works by name, but people knew. I closed with a line I had been sitting with for months. I said, "Sometimes we do our best work after the door slams shut behind us. Sometimes the exit is the beginning." The standing ovation came quickly, not because I was flashy, not because I was famous, but because I had survived something quietly brutal and turned it into something useful, something that served others. Afterward, people came up to me, donors, artists, community partners, and said things like, "I remember that night in Los Angeles. You handled it with grace." Or, "I always wondered what happened to you. Now I know." There was no bitterness in me that evening, only clarity. I had learned that being good at your job is not always enough to protect you, but being willing to walk away from what no longer fits, that is where the power lives. Lumen started as just an idea. I had named it after the Latin word for light, because that was all I wanted to do, bring light into spaces where leadership had gone dark. I took Halvern on as my first client, but after that gala, 4 other companies reached out within a week. They had been watching. People always are, even when they stay silent. I hired Nora full-time as my first employee. She now runs operations and tells people proudly that she once leaked the memo that changed everything. We laugh about it now, but it was not funny then. As for Grant Halley? Well, someone forwarded me a link a few months ago. It was to an Eventbrite page. He was offering a virtual seminar called Leading with Purpose, Reinventing Nonprofit Strategy in Crisis. It cost $40 a seat. I almost clicked buy ticket out of morbid curiosity, but then I closed the tab. He could keep his fiction. I was too busy writing my own real story. The irony is, Grant probably thinks he taught me something. But what I learned came from watching his mistakes, not following his lead. I learned to protect my name, to back up my work, to believe the people who notice and not waste time proving myself to the ones who refuse to. I learned that being underestimated is not an insult. It is a launch pad, if you are willing to be patient. So yes, I was fired on stage, but now I take the stage on my own terms, and I will tell you something. The view is much better when you are not performing someone else's script. I built something that does not need spin, that does not rely on false promises, and that gives credit where credit is due. That is what real leadership looks like, and that is how you rise.